praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Well, this is maybe a strange choice to have as a favorite parable. It's only in the Gospel of Luke. And so I enjoy imagining why, say, Matthew or Mark didn't include it. They included a lot of other parables. I can picture someone saying to them, hey, you remember that story Jesus used to tell? The one about white-collar crime. You remember that one? And he'd tell us about, how the embezzler got his really good idea. And then he'd say to us, now, why aren't you more like the embezzler? Do you remember that? Why don't you put that in your book? Does anyone know what just happened? I think we're good. Can you hear me? Okay. So imagine someone saying to Matthew or Mark, why don't you put that story in your book? I picture them saying, well, you can't put it all in, right? So we got to make some choices. Maybe they didn't see this one as important. It is in some ways a difficult parable. You read the commentators and they just go round and round. What is Jesus getting at? But at the same time, though, I think this is the one that gets preserved for us as a true parable, because parables aren't meant to be obvious. If Jesus wanted to say something obvious, he knew how to do that. He would just say it. But he told these stories as something that kind of gets stuck in our minds, something that we kind of bump up against or bounce off of, things that we just can't quite solve, and that's the power of them. Now, some of the parables, he tames a little bit. He'll put this, a little aphorism at the end that kind of gives you a lens through which to see the parable. Go and do likewise at the end of the Good Samaritan. Or at the end of the parable of the workers in the vineyard, the last will be first and the first will be last. He'll give us a little proverb or aphorism at the end that gives us a lens so the parable isn't just totally open-ended. But this one has not one punchline at the end, but 4 or 5, depending on how you count. Did you notice? Jesus has lots of kind of one-liners that follow this and interpret it. Maybe Jesus is showing us here a parable doesn't have to be just one thing, the way we like to sometimes pin them down. So I could do a Bible study on this parable all day. I am going to restrain myself. So we are going to see it primarily through that last lens that he gives us. Simply that a servant cannot have 2 masters. You cannot serve both God and wealth. And I'll tell you, especially those of you, if you've read this in the King James, that doesn't sound quite right. You cannot serve both God and mammon, it says, in the King James. And that is actually an accurate translation because Jesus uses a word for wealth or money here that is actually originally the name for a pagan god of wealth. A pagan god of wealth called Mammon. So he's almost personifying money or wealth as a rival god. And he says you cannot serve 2 masters. It's got to be God or wealth, God or Mammon. Just by definition, you can only have one master. And in this scenario that Jesus gives us, there's only one master who will make you free. And the sooner you are done with any other master, the better. But this story, it is the story of a man being, as we say in the 21st century, a man being let go, which of course is a euphemism that a human resources department came up with for we are firing several of you. But it's an interesting euphemism because in every other situation, being let go is a good thing, right? If you're trapped by something, you want to be let go. If you're hung up on something, you want to be let go. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Is this a bad thing or might it be a good thing? For this man, though, of course, it strikes him first as a bad thing. He's shocked. Can you picture him stumbling out of this meeting with his employer, slumping down in a chair somewhere? Maybe he's got his head in his hands. What am I going to do? There's a whole life trajectory that's been taken away from me. Now, he starts to understand that this might be a freeing thing, but you'd understand if he gets stuck for a moment in the sense of what's been taken from him. It reminds me of an image. This used to be a real problem in zoos. Maybe it still is. If you've ever seen an animal in a too small enclosure, it's really a sad thing. And it used to be, especially, you picture the big predators, the big cats, the leopard, the tiger, and they just walk in circles, following the edge of that cage or enclosure. And they'd wear the grass away completely. And they'd always go the same direction. And something happened to some of them in their minds, because when they got expanded enclosures, they still walk the same path. It's like they don't even notice those bars have been taken away. At first, this manager is like that. He can't see the change that's been wrought around him. He's stuck in this old way, this old plan he had for his life. I'm going to work for the master. That's my retirement plan. That's who I am. But he realizes in the story Jesus tells that his boss has become his master in the sense, in a very unhealthy way. You know, to lose a boss is to get fired, but to lose a master is actually to be set free. And here's what makes it such a great story. There's a little time left. They hadn't invented the human resources department yet in the first century. And so he's been fired, but he's still holding the books. So he decides to play white-collar Robin Hood. He's creative. He doesn't actually embezzle in his own behalf. He embezzles on the behalf of other people, hoping they will owe him. It's very creative. In some sense, these are huge amounts people owe. So he may be actually writing off debt that was never going to be repaid anyway. How are tenant farmers going to pay back these 100 barrels of olive oil? So yeah, and again, 21st century euphemism, he restructures the debt a little bit here. And I do enjoy picturing, now how does the master find out? Does he receive the books and look and say, oh, there have been some recent changes here, look at this? Or does he start getting thank you notes from his tenants for being such a generous guy? One way or another, he finds out, and the boss just has to laugh. It's a done deal, right? The receipts have been signed by his manager. He says, all right, you got me. Maybe you were a better manager than I thought. And Jesus says, if only you all could be as clever as the scoundrels of this world are when it comes to saving their own skin. If only you could be so clever as you work for my kingdom on earth. Well, a couple of these ways, as I said, Jesus applies it several ways right there in Luke 16. A couple of those ways might be especially helpful for today. He does, first of all, relate it to money. He makes it very concrete. I wonder, if we're honest, we might find that we have a master that we work for, that we sometimes are working for money, working for the system that money represents. But we sometimes find it doesn't work for us. It can be a rough realization. You know, you can work for Mammon, but Mammon doesn't owe you anything. Mammon isn't a master like God. I think sometimes we find out we've been fired by this money system we've been working for when it comes to things that we really need, like health. And money can't buy that. Or just more life, or happiness. It's true what they say about money and happiness. Or maybe the thing we need and desire most, love. The Beatles got that one right. Money can't buy me love. Now, of course, they also sang, money, that's what I want, but That was a cover. It's a good song, but it's not as deep. If you want deep, go for money can't buy me love. But sometimes we're like this manager. And we realize, when money fails us, we realize that wasn't the master we wanted anyway. I tell you, one of the great gifts of my life is so often getting to hear people's stories. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, now at the time it seemed really bad that I lost my job as often. I didn't get the job I wanted. Something didn't work out. And at the time I thought, oh, this is awful. But I got some clarity. And it led somewhere in my life. People can give thanks for it later. This isn't uncommon at all. Sometimes we get to have an experience like this manager. And Jesus says, now that you get this new perspective, apply this. Sometimes we do have some of the currency of this world in our possession, in our control, and we have an opportunity to use it. Use the currency of this world to favor the world to come. Right? There's a little bit of time where we have that. If those opportunities come, Jesus is saying, well, then do it. Use that dishonest wealth for my kingdom. But more importantly, the bigger picture in this story, I think if you can answer two questions, you'll know what to do. And those two questions are, who do you work for and who are your friends? Those are the questions this story invites us to answer. And the manager had it all mixed up, didn't he? Who do I work for and who are my friends? But then he gets this clarity. How easily we sign up for more masters, right? If we don't know who we work for, there are lots of masters that present themselves and would gladly put us to work. We work for money. We work for the work that gives us money. We work for the person who gives us the work, who gives us the money. And so many other ways we end up misunderstanding who we truly work for and how freeing that is. And friends, this manager, I think, maybe thinks his boss is his friend. All the relationships are transactional here, right? What can this person do for me? But just like Jesus redefines neighbor in the story of the Good Samaritan, he says neighbor is anyone you have the opportunity to be neighborly to. Now he redefines friend, not someone who can do something for you or get something back to you, but someone you have the opportunity to be friendly to. But the most important insight to take is who you work for. It is God, and only if it is God will you be truly free. Let the Lord of life be the Lord of your life alone. And when you are let go by this world and all the different ways that happens, give thanks. Let the Lord of life be the Lord of your life, and then you won't have to look elsewhere to make sure your needs are met. Know who you work for. Then your life can be about making friends and making friends for Jesus. All Jesus did, after all, was to set you free, to make sure that you were God's and God's alone. And all that is left for you is for you to realize it and then to live like you know